How you doing, everybody? And welcome back to Educatedcollins Snap channel. So we've got a kind of long one for you. Today we're going to be reviewing Reddit decks. Yes, that's right. We're going through all of Reddit's decks of the past kind of 24 hours, looking through them and kind of reviewing them, and also having suggestions. So we're gonna go and talk about their deck ideas and just trying to improve them and make them a little bit better. So it's gonna be an interesting one. Let's get started. All right, so the idea here, we're gonna go through uh, the most recent Reddit deck list. Essentially, I just went through, found a ton of deck showcases, and we're gonna go through them. And I have some suggestions as well. So this might be a little bit of insight into deck building and just ideas of what they want to do. I am keeping in mind context clues in that oh, is this person a new player? Do they not have Series 3 cards? Do they not have Series 4, Series 5 cards? I am keeping that in mind in my suggestions, that kind of thing. But generally, we're just going to take a look at the stuff that Reddit likes to post, because I do think there's some good ideas here. And generally, I do make builds or so for new metas and stuff like that. But I definitely think this meta is kind of very samey. I don't think Black Knight really changed the meta too much. So some of the decks that you're already using are still pretty good. So it's not hey, here we go, we got to change them. Here are a bunch of new decks. I don't really think that's the case this particular week. So just wanted to do something interesting for me at least. So this is what we have for you guys. But yeah, first one, deck 2. You can see, I think immediately from the quicksilver, this is a beginner player. That's my context clues. They said I won a lot of matches with this, lost a few. Not to starting is my prayer. What do you fellow snappers think? Hello, fellow snappers. What do you think of my deck? But yeah, I do want to say for new players, it's very easy to have an inflated sense of victory because you do fight more bots than you would normally be facing if you were climbing past the higher collection levels. You really stop fighting that many bots nowadays. They're a lot better with that. So it might definitely make new players feel very confident, oh, they're very good. And I think that's something that Secondary wants to impart on new players to make them want to play it, and before they really get to the difficult parts of fighting lots of high skilled players. So yeah, definitely when we look at this deck in particular, this definitely feels more of a ongoing White Tiger-esque deck. It just doesn't have that payoff, which would be Odin. So in my opinion, if I wanted to kind of scroll through and see what other people wanted to say, they stand a new player, I do agree with that. But I do have some suggestions on how to take it. I'd probably lean more for a more Odin finisher deck, but still using some of the text that you like, right? So there's some cool things in here. Morph is pretty cool and stuff like that. So I do have a deck build as well, just kind of a little bit more efficient in my opinion, right? Where I'm keeping the same kind of essence. So we have Electra here. I do have some suggestions. Either the suggestions would be your old cards or suggestions I would actually swap if you want to move it up. But you have Electra here, which is cool. I definitely think that's fine to put. Nightcrawler would probably be my standard addition here. Just think Nightcrawler is very flexible early on. There's a lot of things you can do, and people just forget it, as a new player or against newer players, that Nightcrawler can move on the final turn. So people might be assuming, oh, I've won this lane, and then Nightcrawler moves, you play something there. That's something that a lot of people, especially new, forget. Oh, you can move this. And so definitely a card to play in. But I do want to focus on making sure this Odin is in your deck list. Just there's a lot of synergies in here. Electra can work. Ironheart is really good, and then the White Tiger is really Wolfsbane, White Tiger, Electra is really the big key pieces. So I don't want to kind of lose the essence of the build that you had, where you were running Morph, which I think is fine as a tech card, especially early in. So I was I don't want to get rid of the Morph here. Same thing with Iron Man. I think Iron Man is a fine card just to have blindly within. No real reason not to play it. It's just a good card that can be really strong in some locations. So even though it doesn't really fit the Odin essence, right? Maybe something like Gamora would be more Odin-esque. I just think, Iron Man's a good enough card. Morph's a fun card. You want to make sure these players are enjoying themselves, and I don't feel bad about putting those cards in there. So this kind of still retains the same essence. We still have that Mr. Sinister, which I don't necessarily think you have to be playing. So if you want to play the Star Lord, we did take Star Lord out for Medusa. I just think Medusa's a more consistent Star Lord. That also works with Odin as well. So if you want to do that as well, I mean, Star Lord kind of works with Odin too. But I mean, if they're contesting your lane, you're kind of probably already good. So that kind of thing. And then generally, if you don't want to be playing Morph, you can just play Mr. Fantastic in as well, right? So we keep the same essence, but we're kind of, adjusting it, making something I would be happy to play in this stage of the game. So that's the idea. I hope with this one you kind of see where I'm going with it. Where we're gonna review it, right? If I were to review this deck, right, it wouldn't be very high score. Maybe like 2 out of 5 or something like that, just because it's not really a very streamlined deck in based on what I'm familiar with, what I'm used to, the types of decks, quality I'm used to, but still has some essence that you can play around with, work within. But yeah, this is the first list. Hopefully we have more to come. So next one, we have this really cool one. I would say from the ones that I saw, we're reviewing like 9-10 decks. This is the most interesting one to me. And this is the one I would have like, hey, thumbs up. It's a Cerebro 3 Ghost Rider specialty. So they're using just the base Cerebro 3 version, right? And they do have bats to kind of buff up some of the unique things. So we have Jubilee, we have Luke Cage, Iron Man, Cerebro. You always want to be playing Luke Cage in a Cerebro deck just to have to deal with those locations. But it's nice. You have a lot of good, useful cards. And then we have some tech and some like function in here. Moon Knight's a nice tech card with being able to disrupt your opponent's hand. And then Ghost Rider does a lot here, where if you Moon Knight something powerful, or you blade something of your choosing, right? Since you know exactly what blades hit, you can Ghost Rider, pull it back out. And that can be really cool if you hit like Iron Man, Professor X, or Eliath. Those are really, really nice hits, right? And I definitely like this Professor X tech, where the Cerebro could be a nice finisher. The opponent thinks they're going to win the Professor X lane. Boom, Cerebro does a lot here. So I think this is a really cool list. You're running Cosmo, which is one of my favorite like tech cards as well. So there's just a lot of tech, and it fits together well. You get to play Eliath, which I think is always a plus if you can make it work for you. So this one, 5 out of 5. Honestly, I don't have any complaints with this. I think this is just a cool functioning deck, a lot of cool synergies. Thumbs up. I don't have any suggestions. So this one I think just looks fun. This is the type of deck I would showcase myself if I played with it and I was like, oh, this works really well. This looks fun. It looks good to me. So definitely think it's seems good. And he hit infinite with it, which definitely looks possible to me. So yeah, definitely like this one. Think it looks lots of fun. So thumbs up for you in this one. Next up here, we have this kind of progress tracking, another infinite player. Looks like he's playing a Hela Tribunal deck, which is something I've talked about in the past before. I think it can work. It's essentially a combo deck. As long as you have the pieces working in the proper order, you're good. And the nice thing about Hela Tribunal is you have 2 ways to win. You don't always have to go MODOK Hela. You can also go Iron Man Onslaught Tribunal with the magic. So you have 2 different directions. You just have to make sure you commit to one of them, and hopefully your opponent doesn't have like a perfect answer into those scenarios. The one caveat here, I do have suggestions for this particular build. The one caveat here is I think the Ghost Rider isn't necessarily the best pick here, because you only have 1 discard, and that discard is MODOK. So if you're discarding the MODOK, then if you're discarding with MODOK, then the Ghost Rider has, and you hit the Hela, then you have that 1 out of that very small chance to hit that Hela to really pop off. You can just discard blindly and then hope you hit Infinite, right? Like that is possible. but I wouldn't necessarily say it makes the deck more consistent. So that's like my little issue here. If I were to kind of readjust or add some suggestions, I do have a couple. Right, I have Ghost Rider down here, and just a couple of suggestions here. I instead replace it with Giganto. I just think having another big target is usually good in a deck like this. There isn't necessarily too much reach with this without an extra big card, right? The cards aren't particularly big all without an extra Giganto. That's why I would look at it. But I think there's other suggestions you can put. You could just put Electro to have another alternative to Magic. So Magic is definitely one of the ways to do it, right? But Electro is another way of doing it where you have the ability to play the Iron Man into the Onslaught into the Tribunal, right? So Magic is right there the only way to do it. I guess the other way to do it would be to Jubilee or Iron Lad the ways and hit exactly what you want. But generally, right, the easiest way is to Magic, but Electro lets you do that as well. And then Chavez is just for consistency's sake. So you do get to have a higher chance of getting that perfect order if you get the Chavez instead of the Giganto or anything like that. You could definitely do that. Or if you just want another like tech unit, you can Magneto. So sometimes people will try to Cosmo your Invisible Women, and if you go Magneto, then you can Magneto away their Cosmo, and that can definitely be a good tech play. Doesn't always matter too much, but it is something that you can definitely catch people off guard if that was their game plan. And then Hulk is just like if you just don't have anything, if you don't have Giganto, if you don't have Magneto, right, that kind of thing, then you could just put a Hulk in there. Of course you could still go Ghost Rider. I just don't think it's higher EV or like more consistent to have a Ghost Rider in than something else, but it's not necessarily like a bad card in any way. I'm just looking at like what's probably more consistent, probably some of the other choices. So those would be my suggestions there. But generally, if you made Infinite with it, it's probably fine. And if you like Ghost Rider, which is what you seem to be saying, then just play with the cards you like. Right? I think that's more important at the end of the day. But I'm here giving suggestions. That's probably some of the directions I would be looking at. Next up, we've got this Dak and Deadpool one. So this one was really interesting as I was looking through. I was just trying to imagine how the game plays out, how it really functions. And initially I did not like this deck. I gotta be honest. I was looking at this deck, wasn't really getting it. I was like, where's your win condition? That was my issue with this deck when I was looking at it. Like, there's not really the most clearest of win conditions. But as I was really like just playing out the games in my head, I really started to see like Dakin itself gives you enough to win, and you are playing Magic, so the games can be longer where you can roll your win condition. And Dakin Zola is really just pretty good. Like that is a very nice turn 6 into turn 7 play. If you can go Dakin Zola, then you get two Dakins on the board, plus you get 2 swords if you kill both swords or all 3 swords if you haven't opened them. Then you can really just like pop and really have these huge targets. Though the I guess the issues I have, it's not really necessarily weak to Shang-Chi or anything like that, since like a lot of times you're gonna have 4 or 8 power. Like if you've popped everything with Nova, then it might be 10 power. So that's a little bit caveat. But a lot of times they'll be under Shang-Chi, and then you can just pop off in the final turns, and that's like generally good. And you still have the Deadpool play generally as well. You're not necessarily, so normally in these type of decks, you're more Deadpool focused. Like Deadpool is your main win condition, and then Dakin and Venom are all secondary. They're all secondary. Where Deadpool is really what is carrying you. Here, Deadpool is the secondary, where Dakin is the main. I think that's definitely a different way of playing that a lot of people don't necessarily usually play these type of destroy decks in that function. So definitely with that all that in mind, I end up liking this deck a little bit more. I still think there are improvements to be made and suggestions, so I do have some suggestions still. Um, Even though like it still makes sense, I still think there's some things that you could put. I do have a couple here. First thing is there's no Hulk Blaster. So normally if you're playing a destroy deck like this with the Deadpool, you want Hulk Blaster in there because Hulk Blaster just gives you such a nice, clear way of buffing up the Deadpool, and that can win you the game by itself if you go Deadpool, Hulk Blaster, and then you destroy. Like that's so much power. You can also Venom it. That's a lot of power for your destroy deck. So I do think having a Hulk Blaster is something that makes a lot of sense. And the one card we've taken out here is Shang-Chi. I don't think Shang-Chi is necessarily bad. I just don't think it's necessarily needed in this deck. This deck wants to be doing its own thing, not really countering your opponent's thing. Though you can definitely play Shang-Chi. It's still a really powerful card, so it's still in there. But it's just something like if you needed to change something, that's something I'd be looking at. Cullen Wing also right looks weird, but I did read their suggestion why they have it. It's just a combo with the magic to have good turn 7 plays. It's also a decent turn 5 play with just Dakin into Colin Wing by itself, like do nothing else. With that play, you do have to make sure that you don't have any other one cost cards odd in your hand, which honestly is pretty easy to do if you are focusing on that play. But still something you can do for sure. So we left it in. Another thing I think is pretty cool is the Taskmaster. If you are going to be buffing up your Deadpool, Taskmaster is just a nice follow up, right? You play a huge Deadpool into a huge Taskmaster, and then Null and Death, right? Death is normally a good play, but there's just a lot of Mobius. So it's harder to fully recommend Death because there's going to be matchups where it's super dead, and there's not really you don't have a way to deal with that. So you even though it's a good card, I wouldn't necessarily be super comfortable with just having dead cards in your deck. Some half of the games or like a third of the games, something like that. So I'm fine with not running it, but it's still a good card if you want to have it in. It's just like not necessary. And then Null, same thing as well. Just a good 6-drop, but it looks like your 6-drop is definitely more focused on Zola than anything else. So it's not necessarily needed to be the big payoff on 6. You don't necessarily have to play Null. Though with X23, you can always Null early and then Zola afterwards or something like that. But if that's not what you want to do, then that's not what you want to do. So I think generally this deck is fine. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. It is. I think its biggest strategy is that it's circumvents it. It like it's a little surprising in how it functions. And Dakin being the win condition more than Deadpool, even though you're running the Deadpool and you have all the Deadpool pieces, the Dakin is really what's carrying you in the game. So I think that could definitely throw people for a loop when you're playing Deadpool and you're trying to like counter the Deadpool, but then the Dakin's really like the one carrying you in the end. So overall, fine with this deck. Maybe not like my most impressed, maybe like 3 out of 5 or so, but functional, works. It makes sense to me. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this one. Next up, we have this. What's to call this? It's like in my opinion, it looks like a zoo deck, but without the zoo. That was my initial thoughts here. Where you're running Bishop, you're running Blue Marvel, you're running Angela Bishop, Blue Marvel. Where's the Khazar, right? Like, that's my thoughts when I look at this particular deck. But they seem to like it. The magic, I honestly, I don't understand here. Like I was trying to figure out like what is the magic for, and I couldn't figure it out necessarily. Like why we're playing magic. I feel like your opponents would like get way more of an advantage by you magicking than you magicking and getting advantage from the magic itself. So or from the limbo. So I was like not fully sure about the magic, what it's doing here. If someone understands this deck and it's like, yeah, magic is because of this, well then feel free to let me know. But I just generally when it comes to suggestions, I do think like this is a Khazar deck. Like this is something you can easily run Khazar in, but not necessarily you have to. But yeah, the Magic I wouldn't run personally. I don't really think um, it's necessary. And then they're running Enchantress, which is fine, right? Like, Enchantress is fine. I'm not against Enchantress at all. I just think Rogue is also playable. Now, it doesn't mean you have to play Rogue. If you want to play Enchantress, that's perfectly fine. I'm just opening up like, hey, Rogue is also viable. I just think Khazar probably makes more sense here. You're running like 5 1 drops, or is that me? You're running 4 1 drops, which you can make 5. The only one you're not running is what the Kitty Bass Forge Nightcrawler is Ant Man, right? And Ant Man I would say is like one of the better 1 drops to be running, anyways. But yeah, it just looks like a Khazar deck to me. You could argue like, oh, the Bass will make this a 4-3, but like that is not that important, honestly, in terms of how much value it could give you. And if you're going to be running all these ones and stuff like that, if you're going to be running the Khazar, then Squirrel Girl is a perfect addition to add. And then another thing is like we're running armor in here. I honestly don't think you need to be running armor. What are you protecting, right? Like if you're fighting destroyed decks constantly, then yes, right? Tech in the armor, like that is something I really like to do. But if you're just like, hey, it's to protect me from Killmonger, right? A lot of the reasons why Khazar can function is that you don't have to play your 1 drops till very late in the game, right? Like you play your 2s, right, and you can play Kitty at any point, right? So you set up with like Angela, Elsa, Bishop, right, and then you just play your Kitty or your Blue Marvel and stuff like that, and you just don't have a huge board that you Killmonger, and you're also behind on priority. So then the final turn you just flood with all your 1 drops. So with that in mind, like the armor isn't super necessary. So that's something I would definitely consider. Do I need it? Jeff, I think they said they were saving up for it, but yeah, obviously Jeff can work super well in this. Like kind of fits the Nightcrawler piece, but you can play both as well. But yeah, essentially the only thing that jumps out to me, right, is like, hey, this could have Khazar in here. But other than that, and then Iron Man is perfectly fine as well. Like Khazar Iron Man is usually the 2 cards that fill this slot. If you're going to just be generic, but still, there's definitely it's definitely fine to have tech answers like Enchantress. Like if that is what you're fighting, play the tech answer. If you are fighting into tons of ongoings, like always lean towards dealing with what you're fighting in your own bubble meta, not like generically what's good. So definitely fine with that. But those are some of the suggestions I would be looking at in a deck like this. Magic I would take out. Like I don't really see that one in particular, but maybe someone else does. All right. Next up, we have so this person is a new player, right? He's collection level 500. So with that in mind, he just wants to ask the Malwarside community about his 2 main decks and some suggestions. So I'm not really here to particularly um, say, oh, your decks could be improved. I'm just saying, hey, all right, I see the essence of your deck. Here's how I would adjust it, right? Like those, that's my takeaway. We look at the first deck; it's another destroy deck, right? But he's a very early collection level player, pool 2 with essence, right? And his game plan is to try to copy the Deadpool with the Moon Girl and then play like 2 huge Moon Girls. Then he also has his Doctor Strange in there just to like kind of psych your opponent out, things like that. But the essence is just like, hey, I am playing tons of high powered Blue Marvels. Now, when it comes to my suggestion, I would say like the Moon Girl thing, not consistent. Normally it doesn't really work out. I used to try that. I did, like when I was playing. I tried that. Didn't really super work out for me, so not not something I would super focus on. You also have the Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange, I just don't think it's necessary. If you're putting one to fully invest in like a Shang-Chi into your Deadpool, just let them do it, right? Like it's fine to like let them just have that, right? Like don't put all your effort into making or dealing with that kind of thing. You just want to have the ability to win other lanes without doing that kind of thing. Ironheart also, I think is kind of fun. Like I see the idea here where you want to buff the Deadpool before you kill it with the Ironheart to kind of speed up the scaling. The issue is like you're not going to have enough targets for it to make sense, and a lot of the targets that you're going to have don't care. Like you can't really hit Bucky, you can't hit Nova, you can't really hit like Forge and stuff like that. Where Wolverine doesn't really care too much, so you don't have that many targets for your Ironheart. So I just don't really like it here. And then the Sunspot is just a good card, but Sunspot really shines when you have tons of free mana to use, right? And this deck really wants to be very particular with their mana. You want to use all their mana. There's not really times where you're like, oh, I want to play nothing here. So the Sunspot usually will be very low power, maybe 2 power, 3 power at most. It's not really going to be a big power play in a lot of scenarios. So not really something I would really put in this deck. I do think, like, from what I've seen, a lot of people like Sunspot still with these starter decks, or these decks that I'm seeing. Like there's definitely a lot of Sunspot with that. I'm like, it doesn't really make sense. Definitely would prefer a Nebula or Kitty, or really a lot of the other one drops that do a lot of work. So yeah, that's the idea. We still kept some of the other essence. We kept the Hobgoblin. I think Hobgoblin's a fantastic card, especially early to just do what you want to do, and it can just like lock a lane. Just a great card if you're paying attention to the game. So perfectly fine with the Hobgoblin, and just the other stuff is just like the Destroy engine. I think is perfectly fine to be playing at this stage of the game. We are adding the Killmonger. I think Killmonger just makes a ton of sense as well. It's good into a lot of matchups. You don't have that many one drops. I could see, if you're running Sunspot, it's harder to play Killmonger, right? But that's why we're not running the Sunspot, right? So we can add things like Killmonger to our activator for your Deadpool. And we're running Sabretooth. So Sabretooth is just maybe the weakest card here. And it was a card like if you don't enjoy, just switch out. Like if you really want to play Moon Girl, you could take out the Sabretooth for the Moon Girl. That's perfectly fine. But in this particular scenario, it's the easiest destroy card to put in here that won't fully hamper you. Now, if you're playing as Mobius, then this card isn't very good because Mobius will ruin the free cost of Sabretooth. So that's like as you climb, you're going to see that popping up more and more, and then that will be a card you easily find another card to put in. But for now, like I think it's perfectly fine to run Sabretooth there. And then for his second list, he has a move deck, which is fun, which is cool. I like that. Have a move deck in here. There's definitely some interesting pieces of this move deck that I think I want to keep the essence of. So we have the Morph. Once again, there's another Morph player, which I like. Like Morph I think is a fun card. So if you can play Morph, definitely more power to you. And I don't want to necessarily remove that or change that aspect. And he's running Claw. Claw's one of my favorite cards. So definitely I want to keep that in. And I definitely like with the Heimdall, you could definitely psych out some people where you play the Heimdall, you move the claw goes to a different lane, and then you're like, oh wait, look at the synergy. I still get more power in that lane with the claw value. So definitely want to keep those two core aspects of this deck that make it unique in here. It's just like the other stuff I would say isn't necessarily super core. The Wolverine, the Wolfsbane, just like doesn't really make too much sense in here. In particular, like it's a 3/7, and that's probably the reason why you're running it, because it's a 3/7, and you can like kind of have it in a lane with a Nightcrawler or something like that, or have it with Iron Fist, and then you move the 7 power over. But it's like it's not really like fully embracing the move archetype, and then I guess you have like Cloak and stuff like that, so you can always move it into other lanes and stuff, but it's not necessarily core, so I wouldn't just focus on that. But other than that, like I think the rest of it is pretty cool. So here, my suggestion for this, right? I'm putting the Human Torch in because everyone's getting a Human Torch. I know as collection level 500, you might not have it right now, but you're gonna have it soon. So yeah, Human Torch for everybody. And it looks sick. Like, come on, you gotta. It looks so good. I I understand the people rooting for Shang-Chi, right? And then, I didn't really talk about it at all. Da, 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 da. But like, yeah, Shang-Chi is cool, but there's a lot of great Shang-Chi variants. That's my take. I didn't vote for anything. To be fair, I was just like whatever the community wants. But um, there's a lot of good Shang-Chi variants. Human Torch doesn't really have that many variants. I will say though that Human Torch is maybe one of the hardest to play, in particular. So that's where like it's difficult. Where Shang-Chi is very very popular, where Human Torch is not. So that's where the difficulty lies. But overall, like I'm fine with the outcome where Human Torch won. So it is the reality. But yeah, so here with this, we're keeping the essence, right? Keeping the morph in, we're keeping the claw in. One thing I added was the Hulk Blaster. So we don't have Hulk Blaster in this particular list. Uh, just probably because we're not really focusing on multiple man, but multiple man is really one of the core early move, like low collection level move deck victory win conditions, where you play multiple man into Hulk Blaster. Now you have an 8 power multiple man that cannot get Shang-Chi, and then you just move that over and over with Cloak or Heimdall and things like that. So that's really one of the better ways to win. So I definitely wanted to add that in instead of Wolfsbane. I think it fits the move deck archetype a little bit more than the Wolfsbane does. Even if you're not playing it on multiple man, it's still a 3/5, which is nothing to scoff at. And you can put it on Human Torch as well if you are playing Human Torch as well later on. So Medusa I liked. Honestly, I liked Medusa. I didn't really want to remove Medusa that much. Doctor Strange, honestly, I think is like power crept. I just don't think it's like super super core in a move deck anymore. I just think there are better move pieces. So I was just okay with getting rid of Doctor Strange just generically. You could say maybe you could put it with Vulture or something like that, but a lot of times it's just not necessary. If you're playing Vulture, you want to Iron Fist the Vulture, or you want to Cloak the Vulture. So it's not really necessary to also have Doctor Strange in here, where the other cards are cheaper and do it in a very elegant way as well. Vision is usually one of the alternatives for Claw if you aren't playing Claw, but I like the Claw, so I'm fine with keeping that in. I'm just like showing if you don't want to play Claw, Vision is usually what people play here, since it synergizes with the Craven, and you can like manipulate its position even if you're playing it into Heimdall and things like that. So it's generally fine. And then Chavez is just like nice because this deck wants to have their cards in order. You usually want to be getting your multiple man into your Hulk Blaster, in order, or your Iron Fist into your Vulture in a proper order. So it's usually better to have a smaller deck list, and that's what Chavez lets you do. It's also something to do on turn 6 instead of Heimdall, because sometimes everyone just assumes you're always playing Heimdall, so they're going to be like, their turn 6 plays can get very weird if they're assuming you're Heimdalling, and if you just play Chavez, it's like, oh, I didn't play around that, and you just can get a free win that way. So it's always something, it always lets you have something in your back pocket to play on the final turn if you just don't want to play Heimdall alternatively. So those are some of the suggestions I would put in this deck. But yeah, definitely still like the essence of the deck, still like the morph, still like the claw. And if you want to play a move deck, that's perfectly fine. So that's just what I would do here. Next up, we have this Disruption Hulk deck. And if you look at this deck, look, this is very similar to the deck I suggested with the Man Things. With the Man Thing's first impressions, this is just the Darkhawk Man Thing deck, like verbatim, like it's basically the same. So I have no problems with this deck. It looks like you saw it on Cozy Snap channel, which is perfectly cool. But yeah, perfect. This is a great deck. Like whatever, I don't have a problem with it. So yeah, the nice. I like the Rogue tech. Still perfectly fine, right? Lets you deal with some of the early game ongoing cards people like to play. So yeah, perfectly fine here. I think this deck is really good. So yeah, no problems with this one. And then here we have a Destroy deck. once again, I think this is a little bit more meta as well, like a meta destroy deck. There's not really any issues with this. You can see this player has good variance as well. He understands the game of throwing your variance around. But yeah, it just looks super solid. Once again, I don't really have any issues with this, right? Like 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. This is just a perfectly meta destroy build with all the meta cards included, right? Like Shang-Chi, yeah, nothing wrong with this one as well. So this one particularly fine, looks good to me. So don't really have any suggestions for you as well. And then the last one, I believe, yeah, this is the last one here. We have this kind of cat zoo deck, with the kitty pride. I could see the synergies here running with that, but just looks like a honestly, the more I looked at this, the more I thought this was once again another beginner low collection level player. Now if you're not, like, hey, like, good idea, right? But that's kind of the idea that I'm seeing, right? With some of he's running like a Pixar, I mean, a Pixel Khazar, like, what is that? You know what I mean? Yeah, so that kind of thing just makes me think, hey, it's probably a low collection level player just running a Khazar deck, which I think is super fun. Like, Khazar is something you can definitely play early and does a lot, and it's his favorite deck as well, which is another indication that they're new. I have not cherished it. So, in terms of suggestions here, I don't really have too much craziness to suggest here. So, here, just a couple of things. This isn't. I would say Khazar is pretty streamlined generally, if you want. So the one thing is, like, this person's running Sunspot. Once again, there's a lot of Sunspot. I would say in the early levels, it just feels good to play. But I think this is a deck where it can make sense because you could definitely not use all your mana, essentially, right? But if you're running Kitty, if you're running double 5, right, which this person is not, which makes the Sunspot make sense. But I think like, if you want to do optimally, double 5, I think, just allows you to have that room to kind of have two ways of finalizing your turns. Either you flood and play all of your big stuff on all your 1-drops on the final turn, or you can play all your 1-drops early if you think you're against a deck that doesn't run Killmonger, and then you can have Blue Marvel or Iron Man as your turn 6 play with another 1-drop. So I like that better. I think it's a little bit more consistent than, like, relying on a Sunspot giving you like 4 extra power. And it's not necessarily 4 extra power, right? Because, like, if you're playing Ant-Man, right, like, that's 4 power in itself. Or if you're playing what 1-drop does he not have? Nightcrawler? No, he has a Nightcrawler. This is a Kitty Pride. He has the extra 1-drop. I don't, right? So generally, like, any 1-drop, like, I would say is, like, on average 3 power. If you're playing a Khazar, like, that's like 4 power. So usually I would say, like, the Sunspot soaking isn't necessarily worth an extra 5-drop or an extra 4-drop you could be playing. So that's something I would just focus on instead. And then some of the other suggestions, we have Jeff and Mobius. I'm assuming they just don't have those cards, so that's not like a slight on them. And then the armor, once again, I don't really think you need to use armor if you're super heavy into the Khazar meta. Like, I just think armor is unnecessary because you're just going to be flooding on the final turn, or you're going to be playing into a deck that's not running Killmonger. So a lot of times I would say the armor doesn't really need to be in your deck, though it's a fine addition if you have nothing else to play. If you don't have Jeff and stuff like that, then it's perfectly fine. So this particular version of Khazar does not run Andro Bishop, but I still think it still works pretty well. It just has a lot of, like, good tech cards, good cards that work well here. So that's something I would be okay with. So overall, those are the Reddit decks, right? Like, those are the Reddit decks. Definitely some interesting lists, I would say here. My favorite one is definitely the Cerebro 3. Ghost Rider, I guess is what he calls the deck. But there's definitely some cool little lists. Let me know what your thoughts are. You agree with the suggestions? I just thought it'd be something different, something interesting to review some of the Reddit decks and see like does Reddit know what they're talking about? And I'd say they do, right? Like being a new player doesn't mean you don't know what you're talking about. So I definitely thought there was some cool ideas in here and definitely had some fun. So take care of yourselves and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educatedcollins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow snap. Your skills will be